I don't know exactly when my life veered off track. There was no warning alarm, no dramatic background music like in the movies. It was just a Tuesday morning, clear quiet, like any other ordinary day in this suburban neighborhood. Yet before noon, I was handcuffed in front of my own home, and my parents stood beside the police nodding as they confirmed the accusation. They said I had drugs, that they'd seen me with that bag. My mother looked directly at the officer and said, "Yes, we had our suspicions for a while." My father just stood there not looking at me as if I were a stranger interrupting a family breakfast. When the officer twisted my wrists behind me and snapped on the cuffs, I was busy wondering if I was dreaming. The metal rings were colder than I expected. Each click sounded like a door closing, one I wasn't sure I'd ever walked through. My name is Eli. I'm 17, a student at Ridgewood High School. I've never smoked, never drank, never violated school rules. My grades are okay, not outstanding, but good enough to stay out of trouble. I like reading sketching house plans and walking with Benny, my small, thin, incredibly loyal dog. I used to think that if I behaved, stayed quiet, and caused no trouble, the world would leave me alone. I was wrong. At 9:14 a.m., the police knocked. I remember the exact time I was looking at the kitchen clock while making tea. 2 officers, one tall one, shorter, both in uniform, expressionless, as if used to this routine. They asked my name, then said they had a tip about drugs at this address. They wanted to inspect. I nodded in confusion. I had no reason to refuse. I wasn't hiding anything, or so I thought. I led them inside. The house looked normal. Shiny wooden floors, cream fabric sofa, silver curtains. All so ordinary it felt dull. My mother sat calmly in the living room holding a cup of tea, not a flicker of surprise in her face. "Oh, hello, officers," she said, setting her cup on the glass table. "Eli's room is the 3rd door on the left." Everything seemed prearranged. I stood frozen. "Why my room?" I asked, voice shaking. No answer. My father remained at the end of the hall, standing stiff like a wooden statue, refusing to look at me. They walked straight to my room without further questions. I followed, my heart pounding, not from fear of being discovered, but because I sensed something terribly wrong. Benny dashed out of the room as the officers entered, tail down, eyes anxious. The shorter officer opened the bottom drawer in my dresser. Without hesitation, like he knew exactly where to look, a Ziploc bag tumbled out. Inside were white pills. Too many to be common cold medicine. I laughed. I couldn't stop. A dry, hollow laugh. "That's not mine," I declared, voice hoarse. No reaction. I turned and saw my parents at the doorway. Mom's grip tightened. Dad stayed silent like a wall. I yelled, they know it's not mine." The officer asked, "Have you ever seen your son with that bag?" My mother nodded quietly. We weren't sure what it was, but Eli has been so different lately. Distant. Strange. My father added, "Maybe stress from school, but his behavior has been unusual. They spoke about me as though I weren't there. I don't know which pain cut deeper, being falsely accused or having my family affirm that falsehood. They cuffed me right there in the hallway." Benny growled weakly before lying down, eyes fixed on me as if wanting to follow. I wanted to hug him one last time, but the officer told me to step back. Jessie stood on the stairs, arms crossed, gray hoodie, pulled tight gaze, ice cold. She said nothing. No word. No expression. When the police car drove away, I looked out the back window. The house receded. From outside, it still looked peaceful and clean. No one would suspect that inside a piece of my soul had just been expelled. The detention center was small, gray-white fluorescent lights, buzzing like mocking laughter. They said little. One guard led me into a narrow cell, concrete, walled with a cold iron bench. No clocks, no explanations. I was only asked my name and birth date. No one asked if I was okay. No one asked if I needed anything. I thought of my mother, her nod confirming the accusation. No trembling, no sorrow, just ruthless resolve. I thought of my father, the man who taught me how to hammer my first bookshelf, now unable to meet my gaze. And Jessie. I didn't know what to think anymore. I used to look up to her even though we were always compared. Now she just stood there silent, witness precisely crueler than any accusation. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The pain hadn't taken shape yet. I felt like I was being pushed from a tall rooftop, but I hadn't hit the ground yet. I just knew it would hurt. I curled up on the bench, feeling my skin no longer belonged to me. This body, this name, this life, no longer under my control. I thought about Benny. Was he eating? Did he think I abandoned him? I thought of my grandfather. Did he know what happened? Would he believe me? And me? I started to wonder why me. Night came, but the lights stayed on. Every time a door opened, even if not for me, my heart still clenched. Hope and despair arrived together in separable halves. I didn't know how long I'd stay there. I didn't know what awaited ahead. But I knew one thing: someone had set me up. Not a stranger, but my own family. And if I wanted to survive, I'd have to save myself. No one else was left on my side. The next day, my lawyer arrived. She was a young woman, hair neatly tied back, carrying an old leather briefcase, and wearing a look of cautious skepticism. She sat down in front of me and said, "I'm Laya. I've reviewed the file. There are a few things we need to discuss." I looked her straight in the eyes. "I've been set up," I said. "By whom?" she asked in a calm voice. I took a breath. "By my sister. And my parents know." Her expression shifted subtly, but I noticed. She took some notes, then looked up. "Do you have any evidence I opened my mouth?" Then paused. Evidence? Maybe, just maybe, a worn teddy bear on the bookshelf, an old toy everyone overlooked. But to me it contained something else, something that could save me from this trap. And that's when I remembered. A camera. I sat up straight. I need to make a phone call. Urgently. I used to think that if I stayed silent long enough, worked hard enough, and behaved well enough one day, their attention would land on me. Even just once. A look. A simple compliment. A time when they asked me before dinner. Not, "Do you think your sister looks okay?" but asked me only me. "Are you okay?" That never happened. As a child, I had no words to describe what I felt. I didn't know terms like loneliness, being ignored, or feeling invisible. I only knew something inside me always felt missing, like sitting at the dinner table while my family looked through me to speak to each other. Jessie is 3 years older than me. She was the kind of daughter adults loved from the moment they met, her blonde hair, confident smile, quick-spoken. Jessie didn't just please others, she made them want to please her. When Jessie brought home a misshapen clay sculpture from art class in 3rd grade, my mother immediately cleared the bookshelf to display it under a spotlight. The next year I won first prize in the school art contest, with a painting of the town where my grandfather lives, with every window pane meticulously drawn, every leaf changing color by season. That painting ended up in a drawer next to a discount flyer from the auto shop. I remember Jessie being chosen to perform in the high school concert. My mother baked cakes, decorated the yard, invited neighbors. Folding chairs draped in white cloth mint lemonade served on silver trays. When I was chosen to play the lead in a middle school play, a role I had rehearsed for 3 weeks, my parents said they were sorry. They forgot, thinking it was only a rehearsal. I learned to swallow disappointment without letting it surface. I learned to pretend nothing mattered. I learned to smile when they said, "You're a boy, don't be so sensitive." Jessie had everything I didn't, not material things, but the space to be herself and still be loved. I had to carve my own space between the cracks of silence. When I was 11, Jessie begged to get a dog. She made charts, wrote a 2-page pledge about responsibility, empathy, discipline. My mother cried. My father said she's growing up. We welcomed Benny, a small, curly-haired mixed-breed dog with innocent eyes. Jessie loved Benny for exactly 3 weeks. Then she complained he smelled chewed shoes and barked too loudly. One day I overheard my parents whispering in the kitchen, "If no one adopts him, they'll have to bring him to the shelter. They'll handle it, not keep him long. Handle as if Benny were a broken washing machine," I objected. Not in a loud voice or dramatic words, I just stood in the kitchen and said, "I will take care of him. I promise." My mother looked at me as if considering a nuisance, rather than seeing a child. My father clicked his tongue. "Then you must take responsibility." Benny was not a burden. He was the first in the house to choose me over Jessie. He followed me everywhere, slept at the foot of my bed, rested his head on my lap when I read. When someone yelled in the house, usually Jessie Benny ran to me, as if I were his safe harbor. I began talking to Benny more than anyone else. He listened, never interrupted, never judged. On rainy nights when Jessie came home late and my parents whispered in hushed tones behind closed doors, I held Benny as if holding on to something that was the only thing left. As I got older, I got better at endurance. I woke up early, made my own breakfast, walked to school, studied on my own. I cleaned my room, did my own laundry, remembered everyone's birthdays. I tried to become someone unfaultable, but all that only made me more easy to ignore. Once I asked my mother, if one day I disappear, would you notice? She shook her head, laughed. Don't say nonsense, Eli. But I didn't see denial. I only saw that she thought the question odd. The only place I didn't feel invisible was at my grandfather's house. He lived 10 houses down in a pale yellow home with a slightly slanted roof. Whenever I couldn't bear the indifference at home, I'd say I was going for a walk with Benny. We'd go to his house, knock 3 times. He would open the door with a familiar smile, greeting us with the warm scent of toast and old wood. He wasn't the type to give advice. He didn't try to fix me. He just made cheese toast, poured milk, and listened. He asked which school subjects I enjoyed, not my grades. He remembered the names of my teachers, my best friend, and even the name of a classmate I disliked. You don't have to shout to be heard, he once said. Just speak to someone who knows how to listen. Once I failed to make the basketball team. No one at home asked how it went. When I went to my grandfather's, he simply said, "That's fine. Now you'll have time to read more of those books you mentioned." Then he gave me To Kill a Mockingbird and warned, "Be careful, there's a passage that will make you cry." He was the only one who ever saw me crying without telling me, "Don't be weak." Later, I learned he had been like me. The child overlooked, the one who didn't fit the mold. Maybe that's why he recognized me when everyone else still ignored me. My childhood had no physical punishment, or outbursts, only prolonged indifference like thick fog making me question whether I truly existed. And the frightening part was, I began to believe that maybe I truly didn't matter. Jessie was different. She lived in light, even if she wasn't always happy. I'd seen her cry over a B+ over not being picked as team captain over her Instagram post, getting few likes. Yet all her pain was wiped away by my parents. Mine lay silently through long nights, without anyone asking, "Are you okay? I don't resent Jessie for being loved more. I only feel sad because being loved less doesn't mean not deserving love. That difference between being loved and being loved enough is what led us to today. I once believed that family was a place of safety. I told myself they didn't intentionally hurt me, they just didn't know. But when they nodded to police, when they looked at me like a stranger in my own home, I realized the emptiness in my heart all those years was not accidental. It was the result of each small choice, each turned back, each compliment given to the wrong person, each hug that didn't happen, each dinner where no one asked how my day went. Now I'm sitting here in a cold cell. But that coldness isn't as frightening as the cold that lived inside me for 17 years. I am no longer the child waiting for someone to look at me. I am the one whom my family abandoned, and I will not let them bury me again. I recall the old brown teddy bear on the bookshelf, the one that could contain the whole truth they didn't want anyone to see. Though I grew up in Jessie's shadow, though I silently envied every glance she received from our parents, I always believed she was kind, or at least someone who would never truly harm me. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies either. There were small moments when she copied my homework because I was sick, or when she pulled me away from a fight at school, moments that made me think some form of sibling bond remained between us. But everything began to shift on the day Jessie returned home suddenly without warning, with a red suitcase and dark eyes. "School doesn't fit me," she said, tossing her bag into the hallway and walking straight upstairs. No one asked further, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't want the truth. In my family, sincere questions were often seen as troublesome. In the weeks after Jessie became strange, she locked her door almost all day, left the house at hours. No one would leave midnight, early morning, rainy hours. The friends she brought home were all strangers. One always wore sunglasses indoors. Another whispered on the phone in the bathroom. One called me kid and winked like I was an extra in his bad movie. The first time I smelled burning through her door crack was on a Wednesday night. I didn't know what it was, I only knew it made Benny bark nonstop and gave me a splitting headache as if smoke burned into my brain. But I said nothing. I knew if I spoke up, my mother would call me paranoid, and my father would shake his head. "She's going through a rough patch, don't judge." I learned in this house the truth is the last thing people want to hear, especially if it tarnishes Jessie's image. She began walking past my door more frequently, not by accident, but intentionally. I saw her standing outside my room for moments before pretending to walk away. Once I stepped out of the bathroom and found my door slightly ajar, even though I was sure I'd locked it. Benny growled when he saw Jessie in the hallway, hands in her hoodie pocket, eyes cold as ice. I started paying closer attention. I rearranged the small items on my desk in a specific order. I marked the closet door's position with a thin thread. I checked my computer for any signs that it had been accessed. Nothing was obvious, but I knew someone had been in my room. But I said nothing. Because who would believe me? I once tried to tell my mother that Jessie seemed strange, but she only pressed her lips and replied, "She just dropped out of school." Do you think her mental state is stable? When I told my father that one of her friends made me uncomfortable, he simply nodded and said, "Don't get involved in adult matters." I was not someone to be heard in this house. I was just an echo in the hallway, faint and easy to ignore. Until that morning. When the knock came, I didn't feel uneasy, just surprised. I was rinsing a glass in the kitchen. Benny lifted his head, ears perked. Outside, the sky was blue and the sun was shining, a perfect morning. Until I opened the door and saw 2 police officers standing there. They weren't threatening or aggressive. They were polite, even toned, as if following a routine they had carried out hundreds of times before. "We've received a tip regarding illegal substance possession at this address. We'd like permission to search the premises." I nodded, a foolish reflex of an innocent person. I had no reason to be afraid. I had done nothing wrong. As they stepped into the house, I looked around, hoping someone would step forward to clear up this misunderstanding. What I saw was my mother sitting in the living room, calmly holding a teacup, her eyes frighteningly serene. "Eli's room is the 3rd one on the left," she said, as if she were showing guests to a room. I froze. After that, I no longer heard clearly what was happening. Everything unfolded in a cold silence. The officer opened my closet, pulled out the bottom drawer, and without rummaging, revealed a Ziploc bag full of pills. I stood stiff. They weren't mine. I had never seen them. I had never even thought of holding anything like that. I spoke immediately. "I don't know where that came from. It's not mine." My voice didn't shake, but no one was listening. I turned around. My mother and father were standing at the doorway. Jessie was somewhere in the background, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, saying nothing. "Have you ever seen your son with this bag?" the officer asked. My mother nodded. "We're not sure what it is, but lately he's been distant." My father added, as though confirming a medical report, "We think he's been under stress, maybe due to academic pressure." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why they were doing this, but my throat was dry. I only turned to Jessie, eyes pleading, and received a blank stare in return. No movement, no emotion. Benny barked as they handcuffed me. He didn't understand what was happening, only that something was wrong. "Stay calm," one of the officers said. "We're just following procedure." I don't clearly remember how I left the house. I only remember walking past Jessie, and she didn't flinch. She looked straight at me with an indifference so cold it chilled me to the bone. In that moment, I knew. It wasn't anyone else. It was Jessie. I was taken to the car. I looked back. My mother had gone back inside. My father stood at the doorway, hands in his pockets, silent. Jessie had disappeared from view. The house faded into the distance. From the outside, it still looked clean, normal, like an ideal family home. No one could see that inside a child had just been erased by his own family. I didn't cry. Not at that moment. I couldn't. Something inside me had frozen. One thing was clear: I had been betrayed. Not by an enemy, but by those I once called family. And now, as silence settled around me like a toxic fog, I knew there was only one way to survive. I had to prove the truth. I didn't know why they set me up. I didn't know why Jessie did it. But I knew one thing: I would not let this story end with a false accusation. When the lawyer entered, I had already been waiting for over an hour, back against the wall, hands on my lap, under the flickering fluorescent light that made everything look grayer and colder than usual. She didn't look like what I had imagined. No shiny briefcase or fancy laptop. Just a spiral notebook and a worn-down pencil. She sat across from me, placed her bag on the chair beside her, and opened a page in the notebook. "I'm Laya," she said, skipping any formal introduction. Her voice was firm, not impatient, but not exactly warm either. "I've been assigned as your legal representative." I nodded. "I've read the arrest report and the officer's statements," she continued, eyes still on the documents. "Do you want to say anything about the incident?" I looked at her, then softly said, "I was framed." She paused. Her writing looked up. Her eyes didn't show suspicion, but no sympathy either. "By whom my sister and my parents know." I thought she might laugh, or shake her head. But Laya simply asked, "Do you have any evidence?" I opened my mouth, then hesitated. Evidence. It was the first time I realized I had nothing concrete. No photos, no witnesses, no journal entries. Just my word, a teenage boy caught with drugs in his room against my entire family. I swallowed hard. My heart pounded in my chest. Then, an image flashed in my mind, the old brown teddy bear, with a faded red ribbon sitting quietly on the bookshelf in my room. It wasn't special. No one in the house paid attention to it. But I did. I had installed a small hidden camera in its eye last year. When Benny started showing signs of seizures, I bought it to monitor him when I wasn't home. It was a cheap device, no internet connection, storing everything on a memory card. I never told anyone, not because I wanted to keep it secret, but because no one cared enough to ask. I looked straight at Laya. "I think I have evidence. Where inside a teddy bear in my room? There's a hidden camera. If Jessie entered my room, it might have caught it." Laya tilted her head slightly. For the first time since she arrived, her expression shifted. "Does anyone else know about that camera?" I shook my head. "Then we have to retrieve it immediately before someone else destroys it." I nodded. "I need to use my phone call." She stood up without hesitation. "I'll arrange it." 15 minutes later, I was in a small booth holding the receiver, hands slightly trembling. The person who answered was Ava, my best friend since 7th grade. She always talked fast, laughed loudly, and truly believed that everything would be okay, even when the world was falling apart. "Ava, it's me. Listen, don't ask questions, just listen carefully," I said quickly. "I need you to go to my house. Go into my room if my parents stop. You find a way around them. On the bookshelf, there's a brown teddy bear with a red ribbon. Inside one of its eyes is a camera. It stores footage on a memory card. You have to get it, and if Benny's still there, take him with you. Don't let them send him away." She was silent for a few seconds. Then, "Got it. I'll do it." I exhaled. For the first time since my arrest, I felt like I still had something left to lead, a small light in the heavy darkness. Laya returned the next afternoon. She walked into the interview room like she'd done it 100 times, placed her bag down, and sat across from me. She didn't waste words. "We have what you need." I almost jumped up. "What? What's on it?" "The camera recorded Jessie entering your room. She didn't ransack anything, just opened the bottom drawer, took the bag from her sleeve, and placed it inside. Then walked out. Clean, quick, no hesitation." I stayed silent. I didn't know whether to smile or break down in tears. "This is enough to overturn the entire case," she continued. "I've scheduled a pre-trial meeting with your family, not just procedural, but a confrontation. You, me, your parents, and Jessie. I want them to see the very action they denied." The meeting was held 2 days later in a small room at the courthouse, white walls, pale wooden table, familiar buzzing lights. Everything in the room smelled like the truth was about to surface. Laya and I were already seated when they entered. My mother wore a white blouse and gray skirt, her face cold but still carrying that air of graceful woman. My father was quieter. He looked around but avoided my eyes. Jessie came last, tugging her sleeve to hide her hands, eyes cast down. Laya opened her laptop, said nothing, and pressed play. The screen showed the footage from the teddy bear, Jessie entering the room clearly and sharply. She glanced around, quickly pulled the bag of pills from her sleeve, opened the drawer, and placed it inside. The timestamp was visible in the corner exactly 1 day before the police arrived. When the video ended, the room was thick with silence. My mother was stiff, her face pale, lips parted but soundless. My father leaned back in his chair, fists clenched. Jessie remained quiet until she suddenly muttered, I didn't think the police would actually come. I just wanted to scare Eli. Laya calmly closed her laptop. "So do you wish to revise your statements?" she asked. Not a threat, just a necessary question. My mother looked at Jessie, then at me, then turned away. "We only wanted to protect the family," she said. Her voice was almost breaking. "No," I said calmly. "You wanted to protect Jessie, not the family." Jessie looked up, eyes red but without tears. "You always think you're the victim," she said. "Always want to be pitied." "No," I replied. "I just want fairness." My father opened his mouth as if to speak, but said nothing. Laya stood and gathered the documents. "We'll be submitting this video to the prosecutor today," she said, "and filing a motion to drop all charges against Eli. Also requesting an investigation into perjury." No one objected. They just sat there in silence. I stood up with Laya. As we walked out of the room, I turned back one last time. They looked at me as if I were the one who had just broken the family, when in fact, I was the one they nearly buried. That afternoon, I was released from the detention center. Benny ran toward me, limping from being confined for too long, but his eyes still bright. He licked my hand, whimpered, and curled up at my feet as if we'd never been apart. I sat down on the ground and hugged him. The sun was mild that day, and for the first time in weeks I felt my skin truly warm again. I didn't know what would come next, what charges Jessie would face, what consequences my parents would confront, or whether I would ever be able to forgive. But I knew one thing. They thought I would stay silent. They thought I would fall apart. But they forgot one thing. I was the only one in the family who had ever learned how to live in the dark without losing myself. 3 months have passed since I was released. Laya kept her word. She submitted the video to the prosecutor's office and requested that all charges against me be dropped. Less than 2 weeks later, I was officially declared innocent. There was no public apology. No parents waiting outside the courthouse. Just me, Laya, and Benny, my old dog sleeping curled up under her desk, as if nothing had ever happened. Jessie was sentenced to 3 years in prison for evidence-tampering conspiracy, to frame and obstruction of justice. She pled guilty during the second hearing. No tears, no explanation. She simply said I did it, alone. But I knew that wasn't entirely true. My parents, the ones who should have stopped it from the beginning, were also charged as accomplices. Perjury, false testimony. They were sentenced to 18 months in prison and 2 years of probation. They lost their friends, their jobs, and each other. Laya told me they stopped speaking just weeks after the trial. No one knows who betrayed whom first, but it was clear what destroyed their relationship wasn't the truth. It was their willingness to throw each other away to protect a lie. I didn't visit them. They didn't send me letters. Since my release, I've been living with my grandfather. His small yellow house sits at a quiet corner of the street, its roof slightly slanted, the front door creaking every time it opens. The fridge rattles loudly every night, the sofa sags on one side, but everything feels real. Not fake, not pressured, no need to prove I deserve to exist. He doesn't ask much. Every morning he places a glass of milk and a slice of toast next to Benny's bowl. Every evening he reads the paper while I do homework or read a book. Sometimes he simply says, "You don't need to rush forgiveness, but don't let hatred last longer than it deserves to." I know he's right, but I also know forgiveness can't be forced. It has to come from somewhere deeper, a place I haven't reached yet. One October afternoon, as yellow leaves began to fall across the porch, my grandfather handed me a thin envelope. "Someone sent this for you," he said. "No return address, but I think you know who it's from." I looked at the envelope. The handwriting was so familiar. My hands trembled slightly. "Eli, don't open if you're not ready." I took the letter to my room, closed the door, and sat beside Benny. The letter wasn't long, but every word felt like it had been written with a piece of someone's soul. "Eli, you don't have to read this letter. I know you have every reason to throw it away, but I'm writing anyway, not to justify anything, but to confess. To myself and to you, the things I've been too afraid to admit for a long time. I was jealous of you. Not because you were loved more clearly, you weren't. I was jealous because you could live without needing their attention, and I couldn't. I always had to push myself to be just right, just good enough, just pretty enough, just perfect enough to be accepted. And every time they ignored you, a part of me felt relief and guilt. I never meant for it to go that far. When I planted the bag in your room, I thought you'd explode, scream, blow everything up, and I'd blame you for overreacting like always. I didn't think the police would actually come. I didn't think you'd be arrested. And when it happened, I was too scared to speak up. I was cowardly and dishonest, and I deserve punishment. But I ask you one thing, not forgiveness, but please don't carry this hatred forever. I've hated myself enough already. I don't want one more person to hate me like that. I don't expect to see you again. I don't expect a reply. Just, if one day you look at this letter and see even a small piece of humanity in me instead of just a traitor, then I'll know I haven't lost everything. Jesse. I put the letter down my heart heavy. Not because of the apologies, but because for the first time I saw Jesse write something not for praise, not for acceptance, not for pity. She wrote just to say it, as if writing it down was its own form of punishment. I didn't forgive her, not right then, but I didn't hate her like I used to either. I realized Jessie was a victim too of our parents, of the unreasonable expectations placed on her since childhood. The difference was that I was ignored, and she was forced into a role, and neither of us ever got to be ourselves. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of my desk. Benny looked up, rested his chin on my leg as if to ask, "Are you okay?" I gently stroked his head and smiled. Almost. That afternoon I took a walk with Benny around the park near our home. Leaves floated down gently. Children played soccer. An old man read a book on a bench. Everything felt strangely peaceful. I began to think that maybe my new life wouldn't begin with revenge, but with rebuilding from the pieces I still had. That night, as I sat with my grandfather at the dinner table, he said, "They called me. Your parents. They want to meet." I looked up. "With me?" "No," he answered. "With me. But I think they're trying to find a way back." I said nothing. I wasn't angry, just tired. But he looked at me, his eyes kind, "You don't need to decide now, but don't let someone else's damage define the rest of your life." I looked out the window. The moon hung quietly in the sky, and I knew a door somewhere was slowly creaking open, even if I wasn't ready to walk through it yet. There are moments in life so quiet you don't realize they're turning points until you're far beyond them. For me, that moment was just a regular morning. The sky wasn't especially blue, nor was it raining. My grandfather was brewing coffee with his old noisy machine. I was feeding Benny, lifting his familiar metal bowl when my grandfather spoke, not looking at me, his voice light as if asking if I wanted more toast. "I have something I want to tell you." I paused and turned. "What is it?" He placed his coffee mug down, then pulled a thick, pale yellow envelope from the drawer of the dining table. My name was written on the front. No decorations, no elaborate seal, but I could feel its weight. "He set up a trust," my grandfather said. "Everything I own, the house, my savings, the small shares I still hold in my former company is now under your name. I thought I misheard. I thought you had it under my parents' names." He looked at me, his eyes calm, but firm. "I did, but I changed it months ago. In fact, before you were even arrested." I gripped the edge of the table lightly. "Why?" He leaned back in his chair. "Because you're the only one in this family who's kept their heart. You're not perfect, but you're the only one who cares, even when no one's watching." I didn't know what to say. In that moment, emotions rushed over me, surprise, gratitude, and fear. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I wanted you to choose your own path," he replied. "Not because of money, but because of responsibility. You, more than anyone, know what it feels like to be cast aside. And that's why I trust you'll never use power to cast others aside." I looked down at my hands that had once been cuffed, that once trembled in an interrogation room, that once clutched my sister's letter in the dark of night. Now these same hands were holding the future. "Do my parents know?" He nodded. "They called me 3 weeks after you were released. Said that, under the current circumstances, I should reconsider. They said letting you inherit would damage the family's reputation." I let out a quiet laugh, though something caught in my throat. "They still think reputation is the most important thing." He was silent, then said, "Maybe to them it really is." I didn't ask more. I just sat there feeling like I was finally letting go of something heavy I had carried for far too long. 3 weeks later, I used the first portion of the trust fund to register a nonprofit organization. I named it Second Light. Not because it was dazzling, but because it came after the first light had gone out when people thought there was nothing left to save. The organization's mission is to support teenagers who've been abused, abandoned, or hurt by the very people who were supposed to protect them. We connect them with psychologists, lawyers, and legal aid centers. I don't do this because I want to save the world. I just don't want anyone else to go through what I went through, the feeling of not being believed, not being heard, not being seen. I've met kids with scars on their arms, and others with scars in their eyes. There was a boy named Mason, 14, kicked out of his house after his parents found out he was gay. A girl named Talia, who once lived in a truck with her alcoholic mother, and still flinches whenever someone raises their voice. I don't have all the answers, but I know how to listen. I know how to stay with someone without demanding that they get better right away. Each morning I still walk Benny around the park, then stop by the little coffee shop at the end of the street. Benny is slower now, older, but his eyes still look at me like I'm his entire world. And truthfully, for many years he was the only world I had. Sometimes I open the drawer and reread Jesse's letter. Not to forgive, to remind myself that every story has an untold side. That those who hurt us may also be victims struggling in their own silent storms. Jessie is still serving her sentence. I haven't written back, but I know one day I will. Not to reconcile, but to return to both of us a piece of humanity that others tried to take away. My parents I no longer keep in contact. Not out of hatred, but because I've learned some relationships are only meant to remain as once bound by blood. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing someone back into your life as if nothing ever happened. Forgiveness to me is choosing not to let their actions define the rest of my life. One late winter afternoon, I stood on my grandfather's porch watching soft sunlight scatter across the wooden floorboards. Benny lay curled up asleep, eyes half closed, his tail twitching each time I said his name. Grandpa came out holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. We sat together on the wooden bench, as we often did in silence. "You doing okay?" he asked, his voice as light as a breath. I nodded. For the first time in a long while, I don't feel like I'm trying to be seen anymore. He smiled. "And what do you see when you stop trying?" I looked up at the sky. I see myself. We didn't say anything more. We didn't need to. That silence was a kind of understanding I'd never had with anyone else, not even with my old family. That night I received an email from Ava, the friend who risked everything to enter my house and retrieve the camera. The email had a photo attached. It was the newly installed sign in front of the Second Light Support Center, painted white, bold blue letters, "A place where everyone is heard." I stared at those words for a long time, then smiled. Not out of pride, but because finally I had found a way to turn pain into something useful. No one is born to live in the dark. Sometimes people are simply pushed there, and if they're lucky, they'll eventually find a light of their own. Even a small one, even a faint one, it's still enough to keep moving forward. I put down my laptop, grabbed my coat, and took Benny outside. The night air was cool. The sky was clear. The streets were quiet. I didn't need anyone to validate me anymore. I didn't need to be remembered as a victim or a hero. I just wanted to live. There are wounds that never fully disappear, but we can choose to move forward without letting them control us. My story isn't just about betrayal. It's about reclaiming self-worth amid the ruins and the silence. I've learned that forgiveness isn't a gift we give to others. It's the freedom we give to ourselves to escape the past. I've also realized that sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about those who stay and listen when you have nothing left to give. If this story has touched you, if you've ever felt like an invisible person in your own home, I hope you know you're not alone. There is always a second light waiting for those brave enough to search for it. Thank you for walking with me through this journey. If this story meant something to you, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear from you.